Welcome to our first webinar series of 2013. Today is January 22nd, and we'll be presenting a webinar entitled Using Auditing to Improve Your Environmental Management System and Achieve Organizational Goals. And joining us today is Dennis Sasseville, who's with Normando Associates, and he has over 35 years experience and is an active in the auditing community through a variety of services, including environmental management systems. And he's a lead certified auditor. He's also got experience as a Certified Hazardous Materials Manager. And Dennis is very active in the Auditing Roundtable, which is one of our several partners that are helping to present the series that we started late last year. Angela Miller at the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable will be providing us with this technical support as we go through. And just a couple of ground rules before we get started, is we are recording this for our resources for folks that can't attend today. Attendees are in a mute mode. There will be opportunities to ask questions through a little chat box, which you can locate on the GoToWebinar panel. There will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We ask you to take a few minutes to help us with that. And then finally, the Department of Ecology will be posting this presentation to our website, and the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable will be recording it and posting it to their YouTube channel later this week. So if we'll go ahead and get started, if there aren't any questions. Angela, why don't we go to the next slide? So just a reminder, we started this series back in September 2012 with an introduction to EMS, both Part 1 and Part 2. Next slide. Then we moved into presentations by the Stewardship Action Council related to implementation, how do you measure and monitor performance within your EMS, and a focus on communications and engagement. Go ahead. And today we're starting off on the auditing session, and you can see there that we'll be covering quite a few items today to prepare for and understanding auditing. And then there'll be a final EMS auditing presentation on February 26th, and that's available for registration now through the Ecology website. Okay. So first of all, I just usually open this up just to remind folks that the Washington State Department of Ecology does allow an EMS alternative. Our state has a state pollution prevention planning program under our RCW. And so we allow for companies to use an EMS in lieu of the traditional pollution prevention plan. Okay? So basically the process is to work with our regional staff. We have folks located throughout the state that can work with you individually. There's a basic process to submit a request in terms of how your EMS meets our P2 planning criteria. And our P2 planning criteria primarily focused on initially hazardous waste reduction, as well as reductions in the toxics release inventory emissions. But we do allow broader aspects, including water, energy, and other attributes. There's a process to provide some documentation for our regional staff to discuss and collaborate with you on that process. Next slide. And then we usually kick things off through initial site visit. And then we ask the facility to conduct a periodic assessment. And this is required once every 5 years, but we recommend once every 3 years. And really today is our topic around the periodic assessment. Ecology doesn't do a full-blown EMS audit. It's more of an assessment of where you are in the process and how we can support the organization going forward. We do have an annual progress report that can be used through our new Turbo Plan online reporting system, or we can rely on our traditional email system as well. Next slide. So again, the three pieces to the EMS alternative at Ecology is to make sure that you address both the pollution prevention policy within the organization, focus on implementation, and then how you go about doing monitoring and measurement. All right. This next slide is really just a checklist that we've put together to help you through the major components of the EMS. And this is available on our website, and you can use it as a way to kind of organize your materials, to identify the major attributes or elements that Ecology will be looking at as we work with folks on their EMS. Next slide. And then, as you can see, there's a review of objectives and targets, roles and responsibilities, training. And then under item 2.3, we talk about the monitoring and measurement. And under that initial one, there's an area for periodic assessment. And so it's a commitment to conduct periodic assessment of your EMS, and including specific pollution prevention criteria. And then, as I mentioned, there's the annual performance report. Next slide. So before we get started with Dennis, we like to typically do a short interactive poll. So the question today, have you conducted any of these types of EMS audits at your facility? And just check the appropriate box, and you can check all that apply. You can do, some folks do internal self-audits through the business or corporate entity. Some folks do independent third-party audits where they bring in an outside entity. As I mentioned, some folks do corporate audits from their headquarters. Some do a registrar or certification audit from a body that will certify your EMS. And then, of course, some folks haven't really done that. They're just getting started on the process and haven't really conducted an audit or assessment. So let's go ahead and check those. So here we go. The results are in. Most folks are checking internal audits. A lot of folks doing independent third-party audits as well as corporate audits. And then a smaller percentage that have not. So that gives us a good sense of the folks on the line today. All right, so thank you for that. All right, we're going to turn it over to Dennis, and he'll go through the remainder of the presentation. If you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to type those into the chat box. And we'll take those perhaps as they come up, and Dennis can also gauge that as we go through the presentation. All right, thank you, Dennis.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate the fact that there's a wide array of experience levels out there and a wide array of purposes for even considering doing EMS audits. It looked like a lot of you have experience with internal auditing, which is great. That's primarily the focus of most of my remarks today. Next slide, Angela. So the key theme that I like to think about for this part one, we'll be doing part two in February, is really interweave throughout both parts, is that management system auditing can help drive environmental and sustainability improvements. Not just auditing for the sake of auditing, but you're kind of auditing for a purpose, especially when you're considering management systems over perhaps just a more narrow regulatory audit. So we'll be talking about who can or should audit, what basic skills translate to competent value-added auditing events, what are the tried and true auditing techniques to drive organizational success, and a bit about how you can ensure that your EMS is functioning well and providing those performance improvements and those goal attainment functions that you seek and that your organization seeks. So we're not just talking about something like a narrow standard like ISO 14001. We're kind of talking about customized hybrid auditing as well. Many of you out there don't follow a strict standard but have your own system or system that's based upon the Department of Ecology's and maybe modified for your own particular corporate or or organizational needs. Okay? Next. So the agenda here is for this part one is mostly focused on preparing for and conducting your EMS audits. We'll talk a little bit about the principles of management system auditing, a bit about EMS Auditor Qualifications, some on tried and true auditing, the techniques of auditing. Appreciate the fact that you can go out there and take a 40-hour, 5-day lead auditor course, management system auditor course, and so we're not going to cover today in 1 hour or so, what you would get in that full course, but we'll do sort of a breeze through. And you'll have copies of these slides afterwards to refer to if we skip through some slides, fairly quickly. We're also going to be looking at extracting value from your auditing program. Again, my philosophy is you just don't do auditing for the sake of auditing, but you do it for a larger, more value-added purpose, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. I'll have some comments that I can intersperse throughout our slides today. And then a little bit at the end on the role of the Auditing Roundtable as an organization in the auditing profession. Okay? Next. So why perform EMS audits? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons, but I like to think of probably one of the primary reasons is the overall intention is to provide confidence in a system that is being implemented and confidence that the system is being implemented in the manner intended and prescribed. And you do that through a structured means of identifying deficiencies in systems, agreeing on corrective actions, and follow up those corrective actions to confirm effectiveness of them. Sort of very, very basic cycle here, but very critical to having any management system work well. Next. So why perform EMS audits? Well, it provides a means of confirming that facility's environmental policy is understood and being implemented. And in the EMS world, and I use EMS as sort of a surrogate for the other management systems, you might have more of a health and safety-oriented management system or an integrated EH&S management system or a quality management system at this point. So a lot of my remarks would apply to any and all management systems. But the environmental policy or health and safety policy, is a critical part. And if you're at all involved in formal management system implementation or auditing, you realize that it's not just the policy isn't just a nice document that gets hung on the wall of the lobby. It is your guidance document for how the organization operates, what it's committed to, and with the goals that it looks to fulfill. So auditing the policy is an integral part of any environmental management system auditing as well. The EMS audits reinforce the organizational importance of environmental awareness, environmental ethics throughout the organization. And they're, in part, a measure of transparency. They foster better communications and can improve relationships with government agencies, communities, and other stakeholders. Not that you necessarily share everything that you find from your audits, but it is a tool and it is an available means for doing that sharing and communicating in terms of results. It might just be between a facility and the parent company, a facility and corporate, all kinds of relationships there, but lots of reasons. All right, next. So why perform EMS audits? Well, yeah, specifically you hope that EMS audits will identify areas for improvement in your management system. And there are different components depending upon how you make up your management system. These that I've bulleted here pretty much follow the Ecology's EMS approach, which follows kind of the grandfather of EMS, ISO 14001. These are the components you're looking at when you're looking at a management system-based audit. These and more, actually. All right. So are there risks when you look at any audit program, be it regulatory compliance or be it management system? Sure, there are some upsides and downsides there, that need to be considered in setting up a program or in looking to evaluate how your overall program is situated and its status. There certainly could be potential legal and financial liabilities if audit findings are not corrected in a timely manner. That's especially true with regulatory compliance audits, of course, but it's also can be true with some management system auditing as well. If you find something, you need to address it, you need to correct it. The big cardinal sin in management systems is not following through or letting things fall through the cracks. And that's what you should be looking for as internal auditors or external auditors would also be looking for a similar orientation. Are you letting things fall through the crack? Inadvertent omissions or inaccurate audit findings usually result from poorly planned or poorly executed audits. So this webinar, this seminar is in part to help give you some tips to not have poorly planned or poorly executed audits. Management can be embarrassed, or facilities can be unmotivated, demotivated if audits are done poorly or are not presented in the right fashion, in a helpful, value-added fashion. And certainly with any program, there are program costs. There's maintenance costs, there's corrective action costs. Hopefully those are more than outweighed by the benefits to the system from your system auditing, but there can be costs, up front. All right, next. So why perform EMS audits? Well, these are all sound and valid points, and to a large extent, auditing is really a risk management function. Here's three gentlemen talking about a risk management issue, that occurred a couple of years back. So, you need to be certain that you're developing a solid, functioning audit program that adds value, because it is a risk management feature within your organization, be it a public or private, nonprofit, what have you, entity. All right, next. So how is management system auditing different than regulatory compliance auditing, which I'm sure a lot of you on the call today are familiar with? Well, first of all, some terminology. We generally talk about conformance to systems, conformance to a standard, versus compliance to a regulation or a law or a statute. So conformance on the management system side, compliance on the regulatory side. We don't strictly hold to that terminology, that parlance. Even I would slip back and forth, sometimes. But generally, when we're talking about conformance, we're talking about conformance to a management system standard. Regulatory criteria versus cultural change. A lot of times, regulatory criteria, compliance criteria, can be fairly black and white. You either have the drum labeled or you don't. Whereas in management systems, it really is looking at your whole business system, your organizational system, and that by its very nature is going to have issues of people, culture, what's the organizational culture, and if you're trying to improve or change that culture, it has some implications. So it's management system auditing is by its very nature a broader auditing approach. There are more things you have to worry about, more things you have to be cognizant of to come up with a good end result and have that value added that you'd like. So is management system auditing just auditing? Well, in the auditing profession, there's always these discussions about how different is auditing. At one time, 10, 20 years ago, I think the thinking was that financial audits have been around for 100 years. The rest of auditing will just be sort of melded in, and it'll just be all sort of one audit process. And in fact, some firms have gone that route. And I, earlier in my career, worked for one of the big four accounting firms, and there was some attempt at having that kind of integrated auditing, even with financial. But management system auditing has a lot in common with any types of auditing, but there are a few things that are a bit different. All right, next. So I like to think of the three C's of auditing an EMS. One is conformance. Are you meeting the requirements, the thou shalls that are written within a standard, whether it's literally the word shall or just the implication that this is something you have to do in order to have a operating, vibrant, robust management system. So conformity to the requirements is critical. Consistency. Within a management system, you have the various elements that interrelate and support one another. So you're not just looking at an isolated component of, let's say, training. You're looking to see how training supports the objectives and the targets, the emergency response, emergency planning, and the like. So my example here, if there are certain significant aspects, as an auditor, you need to know, well, how do those affect the rest of the management system? They've been declared as significant environmental aspects. What effect does that have on the organization's emergency planning process and emergency planning documentation, for instance? Just one example of looking for that interrelationship among the elements and the consistency. And then, of course, continual improvement. Like any management system, this is all built on a quality plan, do, check, act type model. So you're looking for what mechanisms are in place to improve the organization including certainly fixing specific nonconformances that come up, and in doing so, improving the overall performance of the organization. In this case, mostly we're talking about, environmental improvements. And this is one reason why even EPA sort of came on board with environmental management systems when management systems first gotten off the ground, and the ISO standard 14001 was first published in 1996. EPA and many of the states were a bit skeptical that it was just a sort of a greenwashing attempt by industry. It was just something fluffy and flowery. But about the year 2000, 2001, they realized that it really can improve an organization's performance to the degree that, through executive orders and the like, it's become a requirement of federal facilities and federal agencies as well. Okay, next. So we've been beating around the bush. What's a definition of of an audit? And what I draw upon here is from the guidance document ISO 19011, which was revised in just November 2011, just not quite 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And that's kind of there are many guidance documents out there. That is sort of comprehensive in terms of not just covering environmental health and safety auditing, quality auditing as well, really any management system approach. So I would encourage you to get a copy of 19011 if you're serious about auditing, if you have an audit program. It really spells out some of the things I'm going to go over fairly quickly here in this hour. It's not inexpensive, unfortunately, at the copyrighted standard, and when I bought my copy through ASQ and even had a member discount, I think it was still something like $175. So that's kind of a barrier, but it is an important document for auditing and auditing guidance. So ISO says an audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria are fulfilled. So we'll go through for a couple of those elements. So next. So some of the general principles of auditing, pretty common. We'll go through a couple of these here with a few other slides, but you can see the list yourself down toward the middle, the bottom. You're looking for the audit to be an evidence-based approach, that is a fair presentation, fair representation of what you find. You're looking to define the audit scope and criteria, that is you have to define the playing field that the audit is supposed to encompass so it has some meaning and validity. And you need to define the audit program and the audit process itself so that you have some assurance and reliability and consistency throughout. All right, next. So types of audits, these designations can vary a little bit depending upon your source and maybe how your organization considers them, but in general, when you talk about first-party audits, you talk about the internal audits conducted by participants who are within and maybe part of the scope of the EMS. First-party audits or internal audits are totally consistent with ISO 14001 and any management system model, quality or otherwise, and they ensure that the EMS is functioning properly. So obviously you're not totally independent when you're doing a first-party audit. You're probably a part of the system. You may have be affected by the system, but they have a very high value. So I'm glad to see that a lot of you have had some experience with internal audits. Very important part of keeping a system working well and improving it. Second-party audits are usually defined by it's an outside party that has an ongoing relationship with the organization that's being audited. So most commonly you'd think of a customer audit of a manufacturer or a processor where they may want to have their own audit criteria and their own staff come and look at the organization that they're purchasing raw goods, materials, whatever from. And then third-party audits, those are sort of the true external audits, the independent audits, that hopefully allow for an unbiased and objective review of the EMS to determine its conformance to a management standard. Again, this case example of ISO 14001. Audit, it doesn't have to be a registrar, it doesn't have to be a consultant. External auditors can be just outside the scope of the EMS in question. So a sister facility, Central office, corporate office, environmental staff, can be a contractor, can be a state agency, but they're outside, definitely outside the scope of the audit of the facility or the organization being audited. Next. So one question that often comes up when you're designing an audit program or you're looking to revise your audit program, especially if you've added requirements and added programs or added certification standards, do you just do a single audit, single media audit, single standard audit, or do you look to combine it? And there's no shortage of combinations and permutations, as you can see from the examples that I have here. Most commonly, I think you'd probably have environmental and safety, because a lot of departments out there and in the corporate world anyway are integrated environmental health and safety departments. So they probably have a similar policy, consistent procedures, and may report up through the same chain of command, etc. But what you need to decide is when you're doing an auditing, is it a single media, a single element or standard audit, or are you combining them? And there's advantages, plus and minuses to both. Certainly there are advantages in efficiency in doing more than one standard at the same time with the same auditors or same audit team. The disadvantage, and what I always caution, is that be careful you don't bite off too much to chew. Be careful, make sure you have the resources to conduct the audits in the area that you want properly and thoroughly. Otherwise, you're going to end up with maybe a lukewarm effort or a mixed message effort at the end, and cause frustration all around. So if you're going to combine some of these things, more power to you. It can be very worthwhile. You just need to be sure that the planning and the resource allocation is there, so that the end result is what you hope it to be. Next. Some definitions. These are pretty much out of ISO 19011, so I won't go through these. On the next slide as well, there's a couple more, Angela. And you can read those at your leisure if you look at these slides after this presentation, or as I said, they're pretty much out of ISO 19011. So let's look a little bit at the audit scope. The scope defines what the audit will cover, and this might seem obvious, but without sort of planning and understanding of what is the audit supposed to cover, you can end up with sort of some muddled results. If you're an audit team, especially if you're external to a facility or an organization, you're not just going there as a tourist and wandering around and looking to see what you can see by chance. You're going there with a purpose, and that requires some planning and some thought in terms of what the scope is going to be. It's going to cover the entire EMS. Are we there only to look at some parts of the EMS at this point in time? So auditing, even in a very formal sense, when organizations are certified to a quality system or an EMS, it's probably most common in the quality world to break up the different the scope of the audit into different segments throughout the year, maybe different quarters, what have you. Quite common in the quality world. EMS world, I think it's a little bit more common to have the audit encompass all the elements of the EMS at one time, but it's certainly an option either way, and you just need to decide which is the best for you and your resources. Next. So the audit objectives. Well, why the heck is this audit being conducted? Typically, the main objective, as we saw in the definition of auditing, is to verify the conformance to the standard, whatever standard you're following, and the planned arrangements within the EMS. In other words, the functioning and operation of what you're calling the EMS. So if you're following fairly strictly a standard like ISO 14001, you're looking to see all the 17 elements of the standard are conformed to, are operational and are functioning, have been established and maintained using the terminology of the standard itself. If your EMS is more based on, as some are within the federal sector or the state of Washington, a kind of a bit of a broader 14001-like approach, then that's your objective, is to verify that that the facility is following that approach and is reasonably consistent with that stated EMS approach. All right, next. So audit criteria, that's the policies, practices, procedures, or requirements against which the auditor or auditing team compares the collected audit evidence, about the subject matter. So these requirements could be, but certainly aren't limited to standards such as the ISO standards, guidelines, GRI and other guidelines that are out there, industry guidelines, ones that are pertinent to the federal sector, including executive orders and the specific goals and standards and requirements set within those executive orders. What's your audit criteria? What is it that you're using to compare the organization's EMS with? Critical to get that clear up front, both for you and the audit team side, and also for the entity that you're going to be auditing. Okay, next. Audit evidence. Well, that's verifiable information, records, or statement of fact. It can be qualitative or quantitative. One thing that sometimes frustrates a little bit auditors who've grown up through the ranks of regulatory compliance auditing is in that world things tend to be a little bit more black and white. Again, the drum is either labeled or it's not. In the management system world, you're looking to see is a system supporting requirements such as labeling the drum. So you have to ask and sometimes dig into the whys and wherefores of something that might be amiss. That drum isn't labeled. Is it the individual was sick that day? That the drum appeared on the drum storage area? Did they not have proper training? Did they go looking for labels and the purchasing manager didn't order them, and they're out of labels? What's the sort of the reason behind the reason, which helps you sort of determine the different facets of the organization which you're going to, which you can work on to improve and prevent a repeat. So, management system audits are both, qualitative and quantitative by nature. The audit evidence is typically based on things such as interviews, examination of documents, and observation of activities and conditions. You are, you're there as an experienced auditor, hopefully, a professional who understands what management systems are about, and you're looking to collect evidence to determine how well does the EMS that you're looking at, how well does it conform to the requirements. All right, next. Obviously, you come up with audit findings, which are the results of the evaluation of the collected audit evidence compared with the agreed-upon criteria. And these audit findings, provide the basis for the audit report. So it's a logical, progression. And again, 19001 has much more detailed information about some of the whys and wherefores of this part of the process. All right, next. Obviously, you're going to come up with audit conclusions, which are professional judgment or opinions expressed by the auditor or the audit team about the subject matter of the audit. And it's based on and limited to reasoning the auditor has applied to the audit findings. So again, management system auditing is a little bit different than some other types of auditing that requires you to weigh your experience level, your understanding of the standard, your organizational insights, really to come up with the best, the best conclusions that will help that organization advance and improve their management system, which is the basic reason for even doing the EMS audits. Professional judgment, a key in that word again. That's why there's auditor criteria, which we'll discuss a little bit lightly here in a moment, because an inexperienced auditor or unprepared auditor really can't do a competent audit and expect to have the results that everyone wants and hopeful for. So, all right, next. Auditor qualifications. So we'll touch on this a little bit. Certainly, as I just kind of said, the confidence and reliance in the auditing process depends upon the competence of those conducting the audit. Seems fairly obvious. And that competence is based upon the demonstration of a host of attributes, personal attributes, education and training, work experience certainly, the ability to apply knowledge and skills to the situation at hand, and it's to some extent audit experience. As with most other things in life, there's sort of no substitute for experience. Next. So auditors should possess certain personal attributes, including ethical strengths, open-minded, observant, diplomatic, versatile, decisive, self-reliant. Just picking on one of these, would someone who isn't very diplomatic make a good management system auditor? Someone who tells people off, gets them mad, gets them frustrated, interviews someone, and rather than successfully extracting information, just frustrates that person. No, that person probably wouldn't make a very good management system auditor. Yet, in my experience, I've come across several situations where I've heard of companies sort of firing their external auditing firm or their registrar because they sent auditors who, in one case, made the HR person break into tears or the purchasing manager break into tears. Something's amiss there if that happens. That should not be happening, within the framework of a management system audit. And so ISO 14001, the certifying organizations such as BIAC and RABQSA, they certify auditors based in part upon meeting some minimum qualifications in these kinds of areas and attributes. All right, next. Education and training. Do you have the proper education to, or can you acquire the requisite knowledge and skills? Do you have an understanding of the environmental terminology and the principles involved? Formal training in auditing is definitely a plus, but also on-the-job training, there's no substitute. Everyone has to sort of start somewhere. So that's part of the requirements for competent auditors as well. Okay, next. Looking at the auditor's role and responsibilities, the auditing techniques, they need to know how to determine the scope of the audit, how to review relevant documents, and the method of documenting any audit and any nonconformances. This is especially true the more formal you get with your audit. If you're auditing for registration to ISO 14001 or a standard, there's lots of paperwork the registrars require in terms of procedures and doing things right and doing it consistent each time. So these are all attributes that auditors need to be able to understand. All right, next. Work experience, again, there's no sort of shortage for having some of that innate knowledge because you've worked in that industry or you've worked in that sector before. Not all of us have worked in multiple sectors, so sometimes there's a learning curve to be had, but some sort of prior experience or having somebody on the team perhaps with experience in that particular sector can be very useful and really critical to the successful outcome of the audit. All right, next. The ability to apply knowledge and skills, and again, understanding the organization and the culture of the firm or organization being audited, the auditee. So the intent of a management system standard is not just the letter of the law, but kind of the context of continual improvement, because you are helping produce a value-added product, a value-added audit. And the best management system auditors have some skills in this area of being able to size up an organization, even if they're not familiar with it, and understand something about the culture and put the management system in that kind of context. All right, next. Common ethical issues that come up, conflict of interest, certainly, the issue of independence of auditors, which I have a diagram for here in a moment, applying due professional care, looking at materials, facts, and disclosure, and auditor proficiency. All these have ethical implications as well, and the Auditing Roundtable, as does BIAC, has a ethical standard and code of conduct. I believe they're both available online at their websites, which we'll show you at the end of the presentation here, and not just to members, but to anyone. Also, again, ISO 19011 standard speaks to this issue of ethical conduct and ethical practices among auditors. Next. So there are various, relevant ethics and guidelines. Ethics is always in the news, whether it's Enron, Martha Stewart, or more recently Lance Armstrong. It's always a hot topic, and these are just some of the aspects that sort of bear upon that issue of ethical practice and ethical auditing. All right, next. Some of the guidelines that apply, I've cited a federal guideline, but there's state counterparts, of course. And as I mentioned, various organizations such as BAC, the Auditing Roundtable, AIHA, and others pretty much have, for professionals who are members of those organizations, would have guidelines for ethical conduct and proper conduct, not just for auditing, but in terms of just acting properly as a professional. All right, next. So auditor independence, just a word about that, because there sometimes is confusion about, does an auditor need to be totally independent of what they're auditing? Well, maybe either in the ideal world or depending upon kind of the purpose and the degree of independence that's needed. So on my little chart here, along the bottom, degree of independence, the higher the degree of independence that's required, the higher the degree of reliance by third parties, the higher the degree of independence that is needed. So, if you're doing in the lower left-hand corner, if you're involved in internal audits, self-assessments, and so on, it's probably the staff that helped create and is running the environmental management system that are doing those audits, maybe with some outside assistance as well. But it's fine because there isn't an expected degree of independence, and the reliance upon that information is in proportion to that degree of independence, that fairly high degree of dependence, you might say. Whereas when you're going to go up the slope and you get to third-party auditors, registration to 14001 ISO registration, you're talking about needing a much higher degree of independence from the auditors. And then if you're at the high end, if you're something with regard to court or a court case, perhaps public disclosure, that may need the highest degree of independence from the organization being audited. But the point is here, it's a function of who's relying upon that data. So all audits don't need to be in the perfect world. The reality is that, as I said earlier, independent audits, internal audits, are very valuable and are needed within a robust management system. So, just to hopefully make that a little bit clearer. All right, next. So, if there are any questions at this point, we could stop and address any if there's been anything that's not clear. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, why don't we move on then, Angela? Okay, next. All right. So, as I said, in this first session, this first part, we're talking about two components: the pre-visit, the preparation, and the site visit, and shows you some of the things that are required in a proper preparation for an audit. Next slide. You need to define the type of audit to be conducted. We alluded to that earlier. Define the approach. Is it a systems and compliance audit? Many federal facilities can't afford to have separate and state facilities as well. Can't really afford to have an audit team come and do a pure regulatory compliance audit or a pure EMS audit. By nature, it needs to be more efficient and combined. That needs to be well understood up front, and perhaps you need different audit team members tackling different facets for that audit. All that needs to be planned in advance. Certainly defining the scope of the audit. And all these need to be confirmed with the organization, the facility that's going to be audited. Next. So in audit preparation, key steps, these are all things that sort of as a checkbox. We'll go over a couple of them here as we go forward. Again, I can't stress too much that a guidance document like ISO 19011 spells out a lot of this in more detail than we can go through this afternoon. All right, next. But certainly in preparing for an audit, when you're notifying the organization, if you're the lead auditor, the person taking the lead, you need to have a good understanding of what the health and safety requirements are for that facility. Are there special PPE required? Are there certain safety guidelines you're going to have to follow once you get on site? You need to bring safety shoes, safety glasses, eyewear, and so on. Is that going to be provided for you? Guide requirements, for the most part, even if you're employed by the same facility that you're auditing, parent company looking at a facility location, for instance, you're not going to be wandering around for the most part by yourself. You should be guided by someone from that facility who's familiar, who can take you to the locations, who can essentially be your guide at all time. Those things need to be arranged ahead of time. Language of the audit, if it's not going to be in English, that needs to be understood certainly up front and prepared for. Workspace for auditors, for the most part, unless you're a quick in and out, you're going to need some space as an auditor to compile notes, to work from, to review documents, and so on. Dress code goes without saying. What's the dress code for the facility? Meal arrangements, are you going off-site? Things of those logistical nature may seem small, but they really, having them all lined up ahead of time prevents misunderstanding, and almost more importantly, it makes your auditing more efficient when you're on site. You know what to do, you know what the drill is, you know what the schedule is, and there isn't confusion when you get there. All right, next. Certainly the criteria to be considered, size of the organization, locations, how many auditors are needed for the audit team. Is it just a single auditor? Do you need to have several auditors just to cover the amount of issues to be looked at, or the physical space that you're going to be auditing, large plants, for instance, large federal facilities. And it's a requirement for technical expertise. Not everybody on the audit team needs to be sort of a tried and true auditor. Many times it is advantageous to have somebody on the team that has a particular technical expertise and can advise the team. So maybe a very specialized facility, nuclear waste processing, nuclear generation, something like that. If the auditors themselves don't have a firm understanding and background in those facilities, one way to take care of that is to supplement the team with someone with that type of technical expertise. Okay, next. The audit plan should include all these things: the audit objectives, the scope, the criteria, who the auditors are, allowing time for interviews, time for meetings and breaks, confidentiality requirements. If you're auditing on a contract basis, your organization probably has worked out those confidentiality agreements, or certainly through any work order or contract. Those have probably been spelled out, but maybe not. Those things are good to arrange ahead of time so there's no misunderstandings. In many cases, if you're auditing a private sector industry, there are issues of business confidentiality or product confidentiality. If you're auditing in aerospace and defense, maybe there's areas you can't go into unless you have top security clearance. All those things shouldn't be surprises when you show up. Those all should be things that are worked out ahead of time. Okay, Angela? Next. Elements and aspects of a high priority audit, bullet number 2 especially. So if there are certain things that have been an issue with that facility, particular significant aspects have been identified, maybe those need to get more time and more weight in the audit than everything being sort of equally parceled out. Those are all things that hopefully you understand ahead of time and can arrange the audit plan accordingly. Next. Typical documents to review, as we talked about the environmental policy and importance, most organizations would have an environmental management systems manual of some sort. It might be fairly brief and just outline the components of the system. Manuals don't have to be long and large. They can be, but they don't have to be. Many organizations would have a more detailed procedures manual that could be reviewed either ahead of time or you plan to review on site. Sometimes it's appropriate to have the facility send these kinds of documents to the auditor or audit team ahead of time. Sometimes, because either confidentiality or practicality, these are things that you plan to review on site when you get there. But you have an understanding ahead of time what it is you need, what you need to see and look at. Previous audit reports sometimes can be useful. Applicable laws and regulations. Again, if there's if you as the auditor are pretty conversant in water laws and hazard waste, but air isn't your strength, and you're going to a facility that has big air issues and not too much in the way of water or has waste, well, then you may need to do some studying up on particular laws and regulations so that you are knowledgeable enough to look into those areas and be able to judge from at least from a management system approach how they're doing. Specification of the contract, work instruction documents. Terminology here is important. Some organizations call the detailed work level instructions work instructions. Others might call them SOPs, standard operating procedures, what have you. Understanding the terminology, even of the kind of the documentation and document hierarchy within the organization you're auditing, can be important for an effective audit, and to make good use of your time while you're on site. You come up with the results that you're looking for, that the organization is hoping for. All right, next. Audit checklists are very good. There's everything from obviously the I won't mention names, but I mean there's software out there that provides a structured checklist approach even for management system auditing. These can be very useful. Yeah, but so can just kind of paper or Excel spreadsheet based checklists as well. Checklists can provide as a memory jogger. They help you have a place to record objective evidence in a systematic fashion. So you're recording that, and that becomes part of the record. You're especially looking to be able to record non-conformances, so that those can be discussed and maybe cited to the facility during the report. And checklists help do things such as control the pace of the audit, so that you're not spending an inordinate amount of time on a couple of elements and then finding out that you've run out of time to look at the rest of the system. It can happen. It can happen pretty easily because you look at documents, or you start in one area of the standard, and you kind of get carried away, or it gets more complicated than you thought it was going to be, and you end up spending more time, and lo and behold, you're not sort of keeping pace with the rest of the audit. All auditing is really a sampling, so you're not going to be looking at every document. You're not going to be interviewing every employee there. So it's important that the planning process within an audit be able to allow for that kind of pacing and coverage that you want. All right, next. Again, plenty of templates out there as far as checklists, plenty of them available free online. Registrars, have them. Consultants have various ones. So if you don't have one for your organization and want something for internal auditing, there's plenty to be had. I can certainly send some to any of you who want follow up after after this presentation. Next. So, all right, the site visit. Now you're on site. Now you're going to the site. What are some of the things that you need to prioritize? All right, next. The opening meeting, or some people call it an in-brief, but essentially, generally, it's your opportunity to sort of set the stage for the audit, and this is a critical opportunity. So you're expecting, and you hopefully have invited senior management and key staff members to attend this opening briefing, this opening meeting. It usually only lasts 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes even shorter than that if the facility you're auditing is experienced and doesn't have many questions. but the purpose is you're introducing all parties, you're confirming the audit purpose and scope, you're identifying those guides, you're briefly explaining methodology, especially if it's a sort of a sampling type process, and you're describing what's going to happen after, what the reporting and follow-up will be. Okay, next. You're discussing things like confidentiality, as I said, business confidentiality, and the other issues. Reviewing what the audit plan is, the audit schedule, that is. Discussing how you would report any imminent threats or regulatory violations you come across. Very critical. You're not there doing, if you're doing a management system audit, you're probably not there doing a compliance audit. So for argument's sake, let's just say you're focused on the management system, but obviously it's an environmental audit or it's an EH&S audit. You're looking at things that could have a regulatory implication, even a regulatory violation. How are those going to be handled? My short answer is I tell people I'm not there to do a regulatory audit. I'm not prepared to do a regulatory audit, compliance audit. And if I find something, I would let them know that they need to look into it further, and then becomes that organization's responsibility, legal responsibility, to determine if they're in violation or if something needs to be followed up or not. You want to review the emergency procedures. Gee, what's going to happen if I'm excuse me, out on the floor doing an audit and the fire alarm goes off? Where do I go? Who's going to guide me? Do I need certain PPE, personal protection equipment, etc.? Clarify any questions that people have and agree and confirm the closing meeting time. Okay? So as with any auditing, and I think I've stressed this a little bit before, you're looking for three primary sources of the audit evidence. You're looking for documentation. That can be everything from written policies and procedures, historical data, really records of any type. You're interviewing both facility staff, management, perhaps even corporate support facilities. If you're auditing a facility and they get their legal advice and regulatory review from a corporate attorney, you may be setting up an interview, a phone interview with that person at corporate while you're there on site doing the audit. But interviewing and hearing firsthand. And then the last is auditor observations. You're a professional, you have experience and skill sets, you're there to look around and you're there to understand and observe how the management system is functioning or maybe not functioning, at that particular facility. So observations, very critical. Excuse me. Okay, next. In conducting the audit, you're looking to compare data with requirements, essentially. And as I say here at the bottom, it's best not to accept anything at face value. Excuse me. This is tickle. But I don't know if you can see this is a cardboard sign that was on a drum of waste material, handwritten. It says a small lettering, a caution, smells like something dead in here, to that effect. Unfortunately, this was not a serious situation. It was really just one internal auditor kind of pulling a prank on another, and they hadn't taken it away by the time I came along as the external auditor. But the point is, you don't accept anything at face value. You're observing and you're asking questions. Okay, next. Conducting the audit, you're looking at the document reviews, the plan procedures, the records we talked about. Generally, in management system auditing, you're not leaving with a lot of documents or photocopies of things. You're doing your observations and you're reviewing on site. You may need a table of contents or a copy of a cover page to get the document number right or the date right or something like that. But for the most part, the idea is you're not leaving the site with a wheelbarrow full of documents. Okay, next. And communicating, again, some of this is spelled out in 19011, ISO 19011, but essentially, you're looking to get the information you need from the people you're interviewing, doing that in putting them at ease, being able to understand that they're not under scrutiny, that you're looking at the system, not so much the people. So you need to clarify, you need to continue to ask questions till you get the answers to your satisfaction. But so you can be diligent, but certainly not confrontational. And one common pitfall that I often find in auditing is, again, you're usually guided by someone, a manager, supervisor, what have you. Many times you find those people might be trying to answer a question that you've posed to an employee on the floor or in the lab or what have you. Sometimes the supervisor is just trying to be helpful. Sometimes they realize the employee may not know the answer very well. As an auditor, you can't allow that to happen. You're there to sample the whole population, and you can't have a supervisor answering questions for an employee. That's part of managing the audit and managing the verbal part, the interviewing part. Okay, next, please. Again, stressing on observing work scene, work practices. What are the environmental conditions? What's management's attitude? Do they seem to be supportive of the environmental management system or not? What are your professional expectations for a conforming management system? Again, you're drawing upon your experience, your auditor training, and the like. What do I expect to see to this organization that says they have a partially implemented EMS, a fully implemented EMS, they've had EMS for years, they're bored with it. What's the expectations of how well it's running? And your observations as an auditor are every bit as critical as the documents review and the interviewing that you do. So sharpening those observation skills is a critical part of being a good, competent auditor. All right, next. Once you've completed the audit or toward the end, what are you doing? Well, you're meeting with your team, assuming you have a team on site. It isn't just a solo audit. You're reviewing the documentation. You're discussing the findings and determining whether or not were these nonconformities or were they just observations. Essentially, you're looking at, again, the old audit kind of adage of condition expected versus condition found, and you document your conclusions, your findings in your report or your notes that lead to your report. Because you can't remember everything. This isn't sort of a memory effort. You won't remember a lot of things by the time you leave the site, especially if you're auditing all the time and going from site to site. So your records here and documenting what you found are critical. Next. So in terms of the closing meeting, you're presenting an overall summary of the audit, what was covered, what was addressed. You're discussing any nonconformities that you find, and again, you have to have defined in advance what you're considering a nonconformity. ISO defines it between major and minor generally. Hopefully you have some positive things to say about the facility, and it's always good to pat people on the back and point out things they're doing well. Even if they don't have a fully functioning management system, there's probably a lot of things they are doing well, and as an auditor, you want to stress the positives, not just the negatives. And you're looking at observations, or in some parlance called opportunities for improvement. These are things which maybe in your experience, best management practice, you've seen at other facilities, you'd like to point out to that facility. It's not a nonconformity, but it's things that they could do better. And many organizations greatly appreciate these opportunities for improvement. And that's, in fact, one way that in the management system scheme of things, you can be adding value. You can be doing more than just citing black and white nonconformities. You can be looking for those opportunities to impart upon others. Define expectations for follow-up. If there's a nonconformity, when do they have to respond to you, the auditor? 30 days, 60 days, what have you. Those things need to be spelled out and clear. And then you thank the auditee and congratulate, if it's appropriate, especially if it's a certification event or something of that nature. Next. So the adding value can be certainly done through the on-site assistance. As I said, if you remember my graph there on the Auditor Independence graph, if you're fortunate enough to be doing an audit, I say fortunate enough in that audits don't always have to be kind of black and white. If you're an internal auditor, or if you're doing an audit that's meant to improve a sister facility or even your own facility, then you probably have more leeway in terms of also helping that facility or pointing out things that can be improved and maybe even suggesting what can be improved and how you would do it. As you go up that chain and you get more formal, certainly if you're doing ISO certification auditing, ISO certification auditors, ISO registration auditors can't have to be careful that they don't do consulting. They can suggest kind of generic solutions. They can point out best practices from other facilities that they've seen, but they can't really point out what could be the solution at that facility or roll up their sleeves and help. Many times, though, if you're doing an internal audit, that's the very thing that you can do, is help in that fashion, and should look to do that as well. All right, next. Auditing makes for robust management systems. As I like to say as a kid, your mom is probably the ultimate management system. You know, just don't sit there, get off the couch, and make something of yourself. Maybe echoes in your ears. Next. And really, the EMS model, if you need any convincing, I don't know where you all stand with regard to having an EMS at your facility or your agency, but EMS model and EMS approach is how we make something of ourselves. It's how you just don't have a linear program or a one-off initiative that might have some successes for a short period of time, but then kind of dies on the vine. So today, part one, we've been talking about the bluish box, the checking and corrective action part of the EMS wheel, as it were. The auditing, corrective action, nonconformity identification, continual improvement from that point of view. Next month, we're going to talk about the last box, the management review, and presenting audits, and also the management review. In my experience, most organizations that have some management system in place do pretty well with the first three boxes, and can have a pretty good system going, but seem to fall down in the last two. They either don't have a formal auditing program, or it doesn't seem to be an effective auditing program. And yet, without doing that and the management review component, you really aren't going to have that continual improvement. You're really not going to have a full, robust management system if you don't have those two components and that are functioning reasonably well. So that's one reason why we've been emphasizing that. All right, next slide. Just a couple here to finish up. A lot of issues with sustainability. I won't read these two quotes, but my position is, sustainability is supported by management systems. Without a management system, again, you have a one-off situation many times. You have a champion who does some good things, does a carbon footprint analysis, does this, does fair trade that, but they're not really supported. And once they move on to a different position, even with the same company, the initiative dies on the vine. So even some companies out there, some organizations that do well and consistently sort of get patted on the back for their sustainability initiatives, not all of them have a really robust management system backing that up. And yet, for the longevity, for sustaining sustainability, so to speak, you really need that kind. You need a management system approach to support that. Next. So the key puzzles for achieving and sustaining sustainability, you can read these for yourselves, but essentially all these bullets and more are all components of an environmental management system or EH&S management system. So sustainability is supported by a management system, and a strong auditing program helps your management system be robust and achieve what you want it to achieve. Okay, next. Just a few words about the Auditing Roundtable for those of you who aren't familiar with us. Originally a professional organization dedicated just to auditing, mostly environmental, health and safety, but it's broadened beyond that. Founded back in the early 1980s, and currently about 600 individual members. Next. We promote best practices in EHS compliance and management system auditing, both domestically and internationally. We help establish auditing standards. We participate in agency policy setting efforts, and we have a linkage to a sister organization for certifying professional environmental auditors offered through BAC. Next. So this just gives you a slice in terms of the pie of who belongs to the Auditing Roundtable, not just people from industry or consulting, but a number from government agencies and education and legal field and so on. So a good cross-section. Next. Auditing Roundtable does several things. It promotes best practice. It keeps on the state of the art of what's going on with the profession of auditing. And these are some of the organizations which the Auditing Roundtable or members belong to, and continually are sort of monitoring and giving feedback to the Auditing Roundtable with regard to how is the field advancing, how is it changing, and there are plenty of changes. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a code of ethics, and member and professional conduct is addressed as well, so it serves that function. Next. It publishes auditing standards, of which are available through their website. Next. And it, as I said, it gets involved in policy settings since members are from EPA, state staff, and so on. There's a great interaction and working groups that sort of help to work through audit policies and audit practices and keep them up to date. Next. Their certification programs, as I said, BAC is the Board of Environmental Health and Safety Auditor Certification, and has a joint venture with the Institute of Internal Auditors. So this is really one of your prime professional organizations to go to. It offers personal certification credentials, not just in environmental management systems, but responsible care if you're in the chemical industry side of things, compliance, environmental compliance auditing, health and safety compliance auditing, and a new program under development for safety process auditors. I think that'll be the only certification program that I'm aware of where individuals can get certified as a safety process auditor, and that should be launched by the end of the year. Okay, you can go to the next one. It also has roundtables and interest groups. I'll just point out the last two that are the more recent ones: greenhouse gas interest group and a newly started conflict minerals interest group. How do you audit companies and organizations for compliance with conflict minerals? Next. So I've got a couple slides here. Again, you'll have access to them afterwards in terms of how do you contact the Auditing Roundtable. Next. How do you contact BAC? And next. How do you contact me if you're interested in any follow-up or some of the white papers I have on management system auditing. So that concludes my remarks today.
Great. Well, thank you, Dennis. Good presentation, and now we can open up to some questions. I think Angela has a few teed up for you.
Have you seen a movement to employ the use of the iPad with environmental audits, particularly with field activities?
So the question was, have I seen the use of things such as the iPad or PDAs or what have you? Sure, that's pretty common, especially with some of the off-the-shelf software that's available out there for purchasing. Not all organizations either want to go that software route or can afford to, but that is most of them. Most of the software firms do offer devices and or linkages to mobile devices, apps, and so on, which can be useful. So those can be helpful. It partly depends on just your style. Some of us find that just scribbling some notes in a notepad as we're walking along the factory floor is less distracting to what we're trying to observe and talk to people about than stopping and punching something into an iPad or a PDA. But it's really a personal preference in terms of which works. But those are tools that are available to meet whatever you think your needs are to help optimize your auditing.
Can you supply a list of mainstream audit software that findings can be managed, tracked, and used for reporting? He's looking for a PC-based software and something that's not expensive to deploy?
Yes, if the individual wants to contact me through my email contact information there, I'll be glad to suggest something. I think you're hitting on some of the dilemma of a lot of the software out there, especially if it was originally geared up for the quality systems, which quality, at least in manufacturing and process industries, can be a lot more of a complex, much more complex management system than just even environmental or environmental health and safety. Some of that software reflects that need for complexity, and it's almost, well, it is more than almost, it is overkill for some of the EMS needs. And therefore, it's also probably more expensive, as that you're paying for features that you really don't want. There are a few PC-based software providers out there which are very suitable for the small business or small organization. They have limitations. There's little you can do to change some of the parameters or templates, but also the prices are correspondingly lower than the big packages. So if anybody wants to contact me with any specific questions or give me a bit more specifics, I'll be glad to make some suggestions. I represent no software manufacturers, so I have no skin in that game. I just have some opinions based upon experience.
We have another question about the presentations being sent out. A link will be sent out to all the attendees in the follow-up email that you'll be receiving probably either tonight or tomorrow morning. Next question is, doesn't BEAC also publish EHS auditing standards?
The Auditing Roundtable is really sort of the educational arm for the auditing profession. BEAC primarily is the certification arm. So I'm not sure of the authorship of all the times of some of this documentation. They are a cooperative organization. And Wendy, I don't know if you're on. Wendy Atcha from BEAC, I saw, had registered for this presentation. If there's anything that you wanted to add, maybe you could comment. But essentially, that's the relationship. Is Auditing Roundtable tends to be the professional association and the educational knowledge transfer organization, and BEAC is the certification, auditor certification arm. BEAC in their what I might do to clarify is that BEAC in their certification exams does offer study guides. So if you're looking at the management system certification exam, there's a study guide that can be downloaded that goes along with that talks about what different management systems, especially ones obviously that are going to be tested for on their certification exam.
And we have one final question. What would you suggest for a company that is just developing an EMS? When is a good time to try an audit?
Well, that is a really good question. If you're just in the early stages, you could do a gap analysis or initial review, as ISO likes to call it. That is a type of audit, a less formal audit, but it can be useful in sort of setting the stage, setting the schedule for your implementation, especially if you have a timetable that's imposed upon you by corporate or by some other entity, and you need to have your EMS considered complete by a certain time. Having that gap analysis done and a subsequent schedule could be very helpful. Otherwise, I like I think probably when you're about, as a rule of thumb, maybe 3/4 of the way through the implementation of your EMS is a good time to have an internal audit. Now, you may need to have another internal audit after you have all your systems in place, especially if you're looking for certification to an ISO standard. But if you're just having a generic EMS for your organization, I wouldn't wait to the very end. It's an instructive exercise to go through to do it when you're 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the implementation process.
Wendy responded. She said DEAC EHS auditing standards were originally published in 1999 and revised in 2009 after public exposure and comment.
Okay. So I assume that they're available on their website even if you're not a BAC member.
And that's our last question.
All right. Well, I want to thank Dennis and the Auditing Roundtable, as well as Angela Miller at the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable for hosting the Ecology webinar today. We will conclude at this point and look for information related to where these will be posted. And again, join us next month for our final presentation in this series on February the 26th at 11 o'clock Pacific time. Anything else, Angela?
That's it. There will be a YouTube posting of this later in the week.
Okay. We'll send that out as well. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll talk to you guys next month.